something you may have noticed in the previous videos, where good examples have been shown, is how well the objects line up. And although this would appear to be something which is about being slightly pedantic, it again is fundamentally important into conveying information. And we've got really good scientific evidence to support us in this. So we've got really good information from this to understand how and why we interpret information in a particular way depending upon the way in which objects line up. So you have to pay real attention to the notion of object alignment. So you have to think a little bit about where do the eyes travel, and more importantly, where do you want the eyes of the reader to travel? So you have to think very carefully about alignment, and you have to think about the notion of the direction of travel that you want your reader to follow. So alignment is important to this, and it's about creating this idea of what we call a harmonious whole, that nothing is left out. Quite often what happens in poor infographics is because consideration is not given to the path of travel, in other words, we haven't used this kind of alignment, adopted into kind of a grid, information on the infographic gets lost, it gets missed, because people are not being directed in a harmonious manner. They don't know where we want them to go. So they should all line up with each other. And now you can decide how you want to do that, but it might be along a series of invisible lines. And we'll look at these in some examples in a moment. So you need to think about text alignment, image alignment, and everything. And it's about thinking about block sizes as well. So we tend to go with larger blocks for dominant content. And so smaller blocks tend to be that kind of less important information that we want to get across. And the evidence for this actually comes from eye tracking studies. So, if you've seen the idea of using eye tracking, it's actually really fundamental in marketing, because the marketeers are trying to understand what people are reading and why. And scan patterns of the eye are much, much more predictable when a grid is adopted on the infographic, and therefore the information comes across far better, and therefore what you're trying to sell, whether it's a product or in this case you're trying to sell science, is taken up far more easily and readily by the participants than it would be if we don't adopt to a natural grid. So there becomes a logical flow of information, and therefore a logical flow of the messaging that you want to get across. So you can see it kind of here. This is an example of an infographic on the left, which is to do with just calories and alcohol. And notice that everything lines up on a grid. And actually, if we hadn't shown you the pattern on the right, I'd be pretty surprised if you didn't automatically look at the calories and alcohol part first, because it's the largest bit. But automatically, eye tracking will then bring you down into the tier below. And notice now that everything lines up. So it enables us to move across. Now, it's designed in such a way that it's going to force the eye. Again, most people will go from the top to the middle left, okay, because that's the natural pattern that we will follow. And it brings you across, and then it brings us down to the bottom bit. The bit that we're less interested in, actually, is the image on the bottom left and the image on the bottom right. They're kind of supplementary information. The bit that's important, again, notice it's lined up with everything in the bottom in a grid formation, but notice that again it stands out. So again, that notion of size being really important. So using grids is really important to getting the message across. So let's see this in some other worked examples. So here in this football one, again, a really sensible grid. You can see that everything in the football pitch lines up. Notice that all of the donuts, which are used to convey the high intensity contribution, all line up. Notice everything is centered within that zone on the football pitch. Notice, apart from there is a very, very slight misalignment with the bottom two boxes, but notice how everything is of similar proportion and lined up. So really, really obvious. So in other words, the flow of information is clear. There is perhaps the mistake on this one is that the title, and we'll refer to this in later videos, needed to be much bigger to draw the reader down. And that perhaps isn't the most obvious path of flow of information, but can you see how everything at least conforms to a grid on this? Now here's a really exceptional example of how to achieve this. So in this example here, which is physical activity for pregnant women, have a look at it, and just for a moment, I'm just going to pause and just let you look at this as an infographic. Now, I would hazard a guess that you were straight away drawn to the middle of the infographic, not to the title. And that's because this is an infographic which is designed to draw the reader from the center outwards. So, but notice again, everything lines up with the grid. So everything which is in orange, which is kind of that yellowy orange, is all gridded. And it wraps itself very nicely around that donut. Everything which is in blue, the bluey green, again, is all lined up around the center orange point, or which you've got the 6 boxes at the top. Notice again how they are all uniformly lined. In other words, our scanning pattern is attractive because it's the bit that pops in the middle, which is the 150 minutes, and it brings us out into the blue part, which brings us out into the yellow part, and then our eyes will actually bring us to the top. It's to do with physical activity for pregnant women. So it's a different way of communicating, and it's a very powerful way, but notice that everything is on that grid, and it's very simply lined up. Now this is another way of achieving the grid, but helping the reader. So here, a grid has been adopted. So if you look at number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6, notice that everything is in blocks. So they are in a very simple grid. And in fact, if you look at the icons, particularly the icons which are linked to numbers 1, 4, and 5, they line up very, very well. But in order to help the reader, they've applied the track to support this. So, and again, the eye tracking is perhaps being helped a little bit here. Maybe because it's a little bit busier than the other infographics that we've seen, but everything lines up. Look at the top of the infographic. Notice how the reference lines up with who it was designed by. That's on one tier. Notice how the numbers 1 and 2, 3 and 4, 5 and 6 all line up. They're gridded. You're not confusing the reader. But notice this one, which is a very bad example of an infographic. Where are you drawn? Where are you drawn on this infographic? What is it that you want to be looking at? So let's make it slightly larger to read. So it's about the Guardian, but you read the Guardian. Now where do you go? Where do you look first? It's slightly blurred because I've zoomed it up a little bit, but where would you look first on that infographic? Do you see the difference? That there is no natural grid here. You're drawn to the Guardian because that's the bit that stands out. But where is the direction of travel that you want the reader to look? Where is the story? Remember, you're trying to get the story across. It's an overly complicated infographic anyway, but can you see that there is no obvious direction of travel on this infographic? The same with this one, which is a very, very bizarre infographic. But where is the direction of travel that they want the reader to follow on this infographic? It's a very strange one, isn't it? But again, nothing is linked to a grid. All the bits that are kind of around the image of the man with the tattoos, nothing is lining up. So again, where is the eye going to be drawn to? So we have to think very carefully about this, because this is about getting messages across. And on this example here, this is a really neat example. You're drawn straight away to the title because it stands out, it's bold. But notice how everything else adheres to a grid. Notice that the 4 coloured boxes, everything is lined up. And notice that the 2 dashed boxes at the bottom are lined up. So our scanning pattern will automatically go from the top part, which is the 400 meter title. It will take us into the middle block of boxes, and we get our information from that. And likelihood is we're going to probably go left, we may go right, but either way, because they're clear, we can follow the story, And then the latter two boxes, which are less important, are also lined up. So we've got this scanning information set up clearly for us. So when you're building your infographic, you have to adhere to a grid, and you have to align objects, and you have to spend time making sure that everything lines up in the direction that you want the reader to follow. Where do you want them to scan, and what is going to be the most important information you want them to take from your infographic?